team only knocks, it doesn't pick the lock.
His style of play was up-tempo, pushing the ball up. He influenced a lot of coaches.
When he died, he was the second most winning coach ever.
77-74 the final score. The Rams from Winston-Salem College win it.
He was the person that took up where perhaps my father left off.
He was the only child born to a woman who showered him with love. How did that become a part of who you are in terms of a person who extends himself for other people like my dad did, unless you have that in your life at a young age?
Coach Gaines was a teacher, he was a mother, a father, but he was also a coach and he loved his players.
He was brash, he was direct, he was honest. He just said it like it was.
What was most important to him was being able to turn out good men, not just great basketball players. And while he did that and won a national championship and had Earl the Pearl and Cleo Hill, it was important for him, for his guys, to be productive members of society.
You know, he took us from all parts of the country to come together, boys from here, boys from there, boys from there, and we left out his men.
It was fun, but it was business. He got the best out of everybody.
In the late 40s, Olivia and Lester Gaines purchased the Hotel Metropolitan with the help of their son, Clarence Big House Gaines. Mr. Gaines was kind enough to donate the Hotel Metropolitan, and we were able to restore the hotel back to its glory days. It was very prevalent on the Chitlin circuit. It would tell you the safe routes to go when you were traveling. If you were of color, the places that you could stay. It was a jump-off place for young entertainers, folks like Cab Calloway, Ike and Tina Turner. The Negro League baseball team, Satchel Paige, all stayed here in our little hotel. If it wasn't for Coach Gaines, it wouldn't have been a Hotel Metropolitan anymore.
His legacy is important because he was able to bring people together in Winston-Salem, both white people and black people.
The great coaches are realists. They're tremendous realists. They're not romanticists. They don't engage in BS. And that's why they're great disciplinarians.
People win basketball games. Coaches might assist and help them organize themselves.
I was always interested in the history of North Carolina and the history of North Carolina basketball. And the name that resonated a lot was Clarence Big House Gaines. You see a man who took young men who were kind of at almost a precipice of trying to figure out in their life, which direction do I go? But he took those young men and developed them, developed their character.
When I visited Winston-Salem, I missed out on something. I just felt that this was where I would have been in a comfort zone. Every year I went back to the Basketball Hall of Fame, I looked for Coach Gaines, okay, because he had information, he had knowledge and experience I knew nothing about.
I was in his office like 5-6 days out of the week talking to him about life, not just basketball. I was always opinionated, and he would be quick to correct me, he would be quick to talk to me about what life really was like and what really awaited you. And boy, get your head out your ass.
He started coaching up for football because he played football at Morgan.
And I saw him down there with the football team and lining up with those guys and bumping with no pads on and giving them an idea of what they need to do and how they need to do it. You know, this is a tough guy.
He had to learn the sport of basketball. And he had some great teachers, such as Coach McClendon.
Everybody in life needs a mentor. And John McClendon was my father's mentor.
McClendon had been with Naismith and then Big House with McClendon. And so this bloodline went back to really the origins of basketball.
They didn't have enough money to do the recruiting, so they would ride together. They were opposing coaches, and so they would ride together and go recruit people.
Gaines and John McClendon were very, very good friends. You know, they would go to a house, and this house Coach Gaines would go into, and John would talk him up, and the next house they would go into, and Coach Gaines would talk McClendon up.
Winston-Salem didn't have the funds like the other schools had, but he had the talent. He learned how to recruit the guys and got the best out of them.
He was my role model because the way he taught basketball was much different than the way that I had learned it.
The incorporation of the fast break, the movement of the basketball, the elimination of stagnancy.
If he had come along in an era where there was less prejudice, Big House Gaines would be the top person in basketball.
Tobacco capital of the world, Winston-Salem.
For a town its size, it had 5 Fortune 500 companies, of which Reynolds Tobacco Company was a leader. So it was a tobacco town.
And we just came up with this cheer: chew tobacco, chew tobacco, chew tobacco, spit. If you ain't a ram, you ain't.
Winston was a very divided town. I think it was the haves and the have-nots.
And it went through some very difficult periods during his main time at Winston-Salem State in regard to white and black relationships. I think he probably had more to do to keep that under control than any mayor or any city politician or any police chief.
He knew everything he was doing was making a change. And if the change was not at the very moment, it was inevitable, but he was willing to stick and stay.
So one of the things Coach Gaines told us was, learn the rules of the game. So often we know that we're in a game, but we don't know what the rules are. I said, well, tell me what that means. He said, it's called the golden rule. The man with the gold rules.
In Winston-Salem, everything was segregated. The college was segregated, the Safe Bus Company.
The one and only black-owned bus company in America.
The white bus company went bankrupt. White folks had to ride the black bus because it went back to the golden rule. They had to sit on the back of the bus.
He always talked about how education was stressed by both of his parents.
From a standpoint of his record as an academician, I think it's unsurpassed.
The familial ties that HBCUs build are generational.
They are college graduates, 2 sons and a grandson. And the young guy who's going to college, all because of Winston-Salem.
That first generation that got out of the shack, that didn't have to sleep in a room where there were 4 or 5 kids in the bed.
Coach brought us in on a recruiting trip. He says, took us up to the Chidley Hall dormitory, and he said, Sammy Durant, that's your bed, and Bill Hayes, that's your bed. I said, by myself, Coach?
That exposure to something like this and other young black people with the same consciousness allows them to then find themselves.
House always had his hand out for me. I'll never forget, just by accident, I became a TV announcer for one game. I was just doing it as a joke. And it turned out to be a great game, Maryland against NC State. And Lefty Driesell was the coach at Maryland and was just starting on his rise to be pretty good. And we all looked upon him as a great recruiter, but not much of a coach.
I broadcast the game, and it was the only time in that great era of those great Maryland NC State games that Lefty ever won in Raleigh.
And when the game ended, they sent me down the floor to interview him.
I'd known Lefty for his first coaching game in college ever was against our Wake Forest team when he was at Davidson.
And I said, Lefty, we all know you're a great recruiter, not much of a coach, so a good win tonight.
That next day, my phone rang at home, and it started off like he used to, son?
It's like the Lord speaking. And he said, son, don't you ever disrespect the coach again. Boom, that was it.
If it had been somebody else, you'd have said, well, go to hell or something like that, you know. But it was Coach Gaines. And it was something that, you know, it would be a lesson that to this day, you would always remember.
There was some issues allegedly about his health. The teams were not winning.
You know, Coach was, in my opinion, forced out. He was not given the recognition he should have been given.
They started doing things like, you know, giving him parking tickets for parking in front of a building that had his name on it.
He was pretty much told when he had to retire and not given much of an option.
When I got there, it was anything but the coach announcing his retirement. The coach was cleaning out his desk. He had a cardboard box and he was putting his personal belongings in there, and he and I were carrying them out to the trunk of his car.
Our Martin Luther King of athletics How could someone tell Big House Gaines that you are no longer working at Winston-Salem State University?
He never deserved that. It was a disgrace.
Why don't you call a press conference, and if you want to stay, you can stay. And he looked up at me and he said, "You don't understand, do you?" He said, "I would never do anything to hurt Winston-Salem State University."
I found out Coach Gaines' picture was, in the Smithsonian. That was very special. I guess it brings it all full circle as to, the kind of man he was, what he thought about things.
He wasn't a radical person in terms of going out and marching in a civil rights. I don't know if he ever marched in a civil rights demonstration.
If there was a issue in this town, the city leaders had a way getting in touch and talking to Coach, and he found a way how to diffuse things. You don't have to get out and march and have a bullhorn to change things. You change things in a subtle way, and he did it through athletics.
And his way was pretty successful. He was pretty political from that standpoint in terms of how he built connections and relations. He wasn't a radical in the sense of being demonstrative.
And if you looked at the roster of players to what they became as roster of men, as far as doctors and attorneys and business leaders, it's very impressive the lives that he touched.
I think Clarence Big House Gaines' heart was 2 times the size of a normal man.
I love him. I will always love him. He's a phenomenal, iconic man, a mountain of a man. It's really hard to put into words what he means to me and what he'll always mean to me and what the school itself will mean to me because of him.
With Coach Gaines and what you fellas were able to do winning a national championship, I look upon this as just a great homecoming and a great part of my life to have an association with the Gaines family, you players, and this tremendous university that's meant so much not only to this town, but to the history of the game. Thank you very much for giving me a chance to be with you.